Mm-hmm. We did it. Sweet. Okay. We did it. Yay. Yay.
All right. Now I'm seeing it. It made me nervous for a second.
I feel so tech savvy now. Yay. Yay.
All right. Now I'm seeing it. It made me nervous for a second.
I feel so tech savvy now.
All right. Now I'm seeing it. It made me nervous for a second.
I feel so tech savvy now. So now we're just waiting for people?
Yeah, we're waiting till 9.
Oh, yeah.
So we've got 5 minutes. Let's see. So that must be your Google Hangouts I keep seeing flashing, right?
Yes, that's what's up on my screen right now.
Not the presentation though.
No, it's right here.
Okay. I just want to make sure it wasn't showing mine.
No. It's just sharing what I have on my main screen.
Okay. All right, so I'm gonna monitor. I'm gonna turn off my speaker at 9 because I have movers coming.
Okay.
I don't know when they'll come. I just don't want it to be really loud for you. So yeah, as soon as it hits 9, I'll just turn off my speaker and you can just start.
Okay.
However you want. I know a lot of people said like they had obligations, but they're going to watch the stream afterwards.
Okay.
And then I think about 10 people said they were going to be live for it.
Okay, cool. Cool. Whoa. Mhm. All right, hello everybody. I'm going to go ahead and get this started. My name is Amy Turner, and I'm the Director of Sexual Assault Services at the Center for Women and Families. There is a comment section on the side of the screen if you want to ask questions there. I encourage you to put some questions in there because the last portion of this, I hope to be more of a question and answer portion to see how we can do better services with PREA clients. So just to give you a little bit of background about me, I worked for about 7 years in the juvenile justice system, and I worked in a correctional facility for teenage boys. So I'm fairly familiar with PREA and its challenges and limitations, but also its the perks and the good parts about having it around. So have this divided into 4 different parts. So our goals for today are discuss what trauma does to the brain, an overview of trauma symptoms, trauma-informed care approaches and challenges, and then also a time for questions. And hopefully the last 2 kind of are intermingled back and forth together. So this is the brain. This part, I'm not going to go through every section of the brain. I'm just going to talk about 4 different main parts in which are influenced by trauma. So the 4 parts are the prefrontal cortex, or the PFC. So if you hear me say PFC, that is what I'm talking about, which we call the thinking center of the brain. And it's the top section of the brain. And then there's the anterior cingulate cortex, which is the ACC. It's our emotional regulation center, which is the center of the brain. And the amygdala, which is the brain's fire alarm. And then the brain stem, which is all of the basic body operations. The prefrontal cortex is located on the top of the brain. So it's basically like the cover of the ACC. It's responsible for rational thought, problem solving, planning, empathy. It's how you gain awareness of yourself. It's where all your decisions are made. They sit commonly, it's not fully developed till you're 22 or 25. It just depends on what study that you read. And this is what covers everything. It's what protects the emotional part of your brain, and also is a connection between emotional thought and rational thought. The anterior cingulate cortex, so the ACC, regulates emotions. And when this part of your brain is well, It can handle difficult moments and emotions without feeling overwhelmed by them. And I say well in quotations because there are times that we do feel overwhelmed, and that's totally normal. So I didn't want to scare anybody and think that there's something wrong with their brain. But this is when you're able to regulate emotions well, when you're in a very healthy place and you're not overwhelmed or overstressed. This part of your brain is able to regulate difficult thoughts and difficult moments and situations and the emotions that go along with them without feeling overwhelmed. So the amygdala is a very small part of your brain, but it does a whole lot to your brain. It is the primary function is for it to distinguish between something that is threatening and something that isn't a threat. And it is dubbed the brain's fire alarm because it sends signals to the hippocampus, which then sends signals to the rest of the brain that, hey, there's a threat, something's going on, and we need to protect ourselves. When you've experienced trauma, the amygdala is super overreactive and can send false alarms or like panic drills to the brain that something that isn't actually a threat, the body will perceive as a threat. So when the brain experiences trauma, the PFC and the ACC are underactivated, but the amygdala is overactivated. And I use the word activated and not triggered because I believe that triggered has kind of a negative connotation to it. So when I say that somebody is experiencing trauma symptoms, I will usually say that they've been activated because that means that parts of their brain are being activated and other parts aren't. When I did a group called Sparks in the juvenile justice system, and it's a trauma-related group for adolescents, and we used a phrase called flipping your lid, and that is when you are activated by something, your amygdala sends a signal to your brain that there is something going on, and all rational thought ceases to exist, or at least for a moment. And so we describe that as, or what we are describing, is that the PFC and the ACC are disconnected, and the amygdala is taking control, and all emotional thought is taking control, not rational thought of taking control. And all of this happens on top of the brainstem. And so the brainstem is what tells your body to breathe, eat, sleep, all of those kinds of things, which is why there are a lot of physical health symptoms and diseases that are connected, or they're starting to connect to trauma. Complex trauma can influence genetics. So when I say complex trauma, I mean something that has happened for a long period of time. So usually a prolonged child abuse, and then abuse into violent relationships into adulthood, and that kind of thing. And also depending on who was the perpetrator of that abuse. They are starting to discover that complex trauma is something that could change our genetic profile. A lot of arthritis, autoimmune diseases, fibromyalgia, and diseases like that, and disorders like that, they are discovering are connected to trauma. And if somebody wants some of the articles on that, I can find them. I do have them. I just could not find them in time for this presentation. But if we have your email or something, I will send those out to you. And then also generational trauma, I think, is something that we don't talk about, but trauma that exists from generations. So experiences of war, experiences of abuse, anything like that can influence our relationships to systems, which isn't necessarily genetic, but it does influence how we think about systems. And I think this is extremely important, especially when working with PREA, because the way that we think that to interact with systems are not necessarily the way that people we're working with through PREA experience those systems. So a lot of distrust in legal systems, medical systems, community systems. So they don't have the forethought to maybe call the police or go talk to a guard or go talk to a doctor because their experience in the past and the generations before them experiences with these systems aren't healthy. And so their brain has been conditioned to not think of them as a healthy resource. When the amygdala is overreacted, and they may seem very stressed and vigilant, very fearful and irritable. So that's when they're very much prone to anger outbursts, violence, aggression, that kind of thing. They have a hard time concentrating and paying attention. If you've noticed people and you're talking to them during advocacy sessions or therapy sessions, and they forget pieces of information, or they will hop around in a conversation and hop around topics. That is not them always avoiding. Sometimes it's that their brain has now been conditioned to not think in a logical order. And when trauma influences the brainstem, so all of this is going on top of the brainstem, they'll have problems sleeping and eating and breathing. And also, like I said, a lot of illnesses, diseases, and disorders play into that. So when I treat trauma, and this has been my philosophy for a very long time, I use a non-medical model. So I'm not diagnosing people with PTSD. I treat symptoms instead. The DSM was created mostly for, I think there are good parts and bad parts from the DSM and having to stick to that diagnosis. I think now it's mainly used for insurance. So when I look at trauma, I look at it as a symptom and treat the symptom because they may not actually meet the full diagnosis of PTSD. So these are the 5 common trauma symptom categories, and then we'll go over them together. So there's re-experiencing the trauma, emotional reactions, avoidance, changes how they view the world and themselves, and then a hyperactive nervous system. So re-experiencing the trauma, this could be replaying the memory, nightmares, and flashbacks. So replaying the memory and flashbacks are very similar. Flashbacks are usually when the memory gets activated and they may not be threatened at all. So they may not be triggered by anything. Nothing may have happened. The brain just sends it back. Sometimes it can be because they were activated by something. Usually that's when they're replaying the memories because they've been activated by a smell, a taste. They saw the person, they went by the house where something happened or the store where something happened. And then flashbacks are when the brain just triggers it itself. Then emotional reactions. So fear and anxiety, anger, sadness, guilt, numbness, all of those things, depression, anxiety, all of that kind of stuff, the normal common trauma symptoms that we hear. And then avoidance, and trying not to think about the event or avoiding things related to the event. I've seen a lot where people will avoid going to the grocery store, so they order everything online. They avoid certain parties. They avoid certain areas of town. And then there are some I know we've all seen this, who try to act like nothing ever happened and go on business as usual, which isn't very healthy. And will cause further damage into the brain. And so having them talk about it, and this is when trauma-informed care really helps, is in the avoidance category. Changes in how they view the world and themselves. This is probably more obvious along with emotional reactions. Difficulty trusting people. They don't trust you. They don't trust systems. They don't trust family. They don't trust people they've trusted before. They definitely don't trust anybody associated with the situation. Believing that the world is extremely dangerous. So they might become very shut in, rarely leave their home, overly cautious of themselves, and then maybe overly cautious of other people, and how other people that are close to them experience the world. Blaming themselves for the trauma. I know we've all seen this. This is super common, that it's, I shouldn't have been there. Maybe if I had, not drank that, if I hadn't worn that, if I hadn't been with that person, or shouldn't have gone over to their house, and that's a conditioned behavior, because those are questions that come from law enforcement and the nurse, or sometimes the nurse or the medical professionals in the hospital if they go. It comes from family. It comes from people that they care about, because we don't often reflect on the behavior of the perpetrator. We reflect on the behavior of the victim. And then thinking you should have handled the trauma differently. I've seen this a lot in my work with trauma, and that people think that like, oh, I should suck it up and I should be over it by now because it happened so long ago. Anything of that nature. They shouldn't have been angry. Maybe they should have, if, statute of limitations are up, or, it's too late to file a report and they feel like they should file a report, that, they should have fought the person off, whatever those thoughts are that should be around thinking that they should handle the world differently. They might see themselves as weak and inadequate, especially when thoughts around not being able to fight somebody off or not being able to get away from a situation. And I think a lot of people play on this part of trauma, and that's how a lot of people market self-defense programs and that kind of thing, is that, if you are stronger as a person or a better fighter or whatever, that you are going to be less weak or inadequate. And, we can never tell how the brain is going to react to trauma. And so when we talk about like fight, flight, or freeze or something like that, we can never tell like how our brain is going to react to something. You might fight one day, you might freeze another. So you can never prevent something from happening. In that sense, like I think there's always prevention, let me say that. But, when something happens, there's not a lot of ways to prevent it. So criticizing themselves for reactions to the trauma, criticizing being depressed, criticizing being angry, criticizing any sort of reaction that they've had. If they can't leave the house, or, like, I can't get over it, I can't suck it up, I can't, I wish I could just, be strong, or whatever that means. And not allowing themselves to really feel emotions. And I think that also comes from other people's reactions to trauma. Trauma is hard for not only the person who's experiencing it, but for family and friends that are close to them, and also systems that they interact with. So with employers or schools or other systems like that, because it's uncomfortable to talk about trauma, and it's uncomfortable to talk about things that happen. And so they want people to just move on. And we're all conditioned as people to just move on. And so when they're in the midst of things or having these symptoms that keep coming up, they criticize themselves for having a symptom at all. And then the last one, hyperactive nervous system. This comes from the amygdala. So they're constantly on guard. They're hypervigilant. They know like what color shirt you were wearing, where somebody was standing, how many people were in the room, where all the doors were. They feel like danger is everywhere. So they don't trust systems. They don't trust themselves in systems. And they also will project that onto other people. They're easily startled. I'm super easily startled. And no matter what, doors slam, somebody taps me on the shoulder, whatever, I will jump. And it does come from trauma. It is a trauma reaction. And for some reason, my amygdala has not decided that it doesn't see those things as threats, but I can calm down pretty easily. And they'll have difficulty sleeping. And probably difficulty eating as well, or eating too much or sleeping too much. So it's on one end of the spectrum or the other. And loss of interest in things that they once enjoyed. Their sex drive might deplete. Also hunger. They might not want to exercise as much anymore. They might not enjoy sports. They might not enjoy, if they were creative, they might not enjoy art making, performing, or anything like that as much as they used to, and things like that. And one person who's experienced trauma does not experience all 5 of these categories. They may be heavily in one, not so much in others. They may be just in very different places. And so when I look at a person and talk to a person who comes in as a client who's experienced trauma, and especially in what we're talking about in sexual trauma, I will ask questions based on all 5 of these categories and just try to gather as much information as I can about what their symptoms are, because those are what we're going to talk about and what we're going to try to minimize reaction to and bring back emotional regulation, and trust and safety and all of those types of things that help, people move forward from trauma. And I use move forward, not move on. And I'm very intentional when I say that, because moving on, I think, oftentimes diminishes what somebody has experienced and not so much integrating that experience into part of their life and then moving forward, because life is going to be different now, and not necessarily incredibly different, but different. And so they're moving forward. And so it's now, what does my life look like now that this has happened? And how do relationships look like? How does my interaction with the world look like and systems look like? And not moving on and acting like it didn't happen. Okay, so now to the meat of what we're trying to talk about. And let me see, do we have any questions so far? Doesn't look like we do. Okay, so we'll go back to this. So trauma-informed care is broken down into these. For me, these are the 5 most important. So empowerment, choice, collaboration, safety, and trustworthiness. For me, safety and trust are the first 2 that I work on right away. I know in our current PREA, how we do it is we have 3 sessions. So doing trauma-informed care has to be done kind of quickly, because we only have a limited time with these people, with these clients. So traditionally, something that it might take me 6 months to a year with a client, we have to do in 3. So in 3 sessions. So safety and trust, I want the person in front of me to know that they are in a safe place with me. And not necessarily does that safe place mean the actual area that we're in, but as for that time that we're together. So for the hour that we're together, they are safe. Because in PREA, we're meeting them in an institution where they were assaulted. So it's not necessarily a safe place for them. And they up leading to the session with you is not safe. And once they leave, it's not always safe. But for those 60 minutes that you all are together, it's safe. And by that, I let them make choices. So it's, where do you want to sit in the room? Do you want to, and there is boundaries to that. Like when somebody comes into my office, I'll say, you can sit anywhere you'd like. If you want to sit on the floor, you can sit on the floor. Will probably sit in a chair, and I ask you not to sit behind my desk. So in PREA, you're probably going to be at a room with a table and 2 chairs. But inviting them to choose which seat they sit in and giving them clear boundaries of what you're there for, and giving them clear expectations of what they're there for. And that creates safety. So they know exactly what's going to happen, exactly what you're going to do, and what the expectations are for those 60 minutes that you're together. And then for trust, that's part of it too, is explaining, these are my boundaries, and this is what I can say and can't say. This is what I can do and can't do. I'm here for you and to help you as a client. Make the best of the situation and what we can do in these 3 sessions together. And empowerment and collaboration, I think, play off each other as well, because you're collaborating on what are we going to do in these 3 sessions to help you move forward, and whatever that may be. If it's, I just need somebody to listen to, or or to listen to me, or I just, like I need to process this, or like I want to figure out how to make a complaint or how to do this or how to do that, whatever the case may be. Giving them the choice on what they want to work on, and then also empowering them in those choices, especially in PREA situations. It's like you're working in an institution, in a correctional system that has a lot of different systems working together, which can be challenging and frustrating at times, because like there is a protocol for everything, and there are a lot of systems that you have to move through, and there are things that you can and can't do. So your advocacy out in the community and your advocacy within correctional system walls are two very different ways of advocating. So I think being a person and being an advocate who is there to give them as much as they can, and give them as much choice and empowerment as they can, is probably what they need. And they know that they only have those 3 sessions to do it in. So that might look like empowering them to make choices that they need to make, empowering them to go talk to, excuse me, let me get a drink, to talk to their case managers, because they might believe that their case manager isn't going to do anything about it. So empowering them, modeling what that looks like to go talk to their case manager about a situation, role playing, talking through that situation, and giving them the safety to talk about a situation and how they want to move through it and navigate it. And that's the same out in the community. When we're doing advocacy here and therapy here, all of this is coming into play. We are collaborating. I describe myself as the navigator in a situation, but the person I'm working with, or the client that I'm working with, is the person who's driving the vehicle, whatever that vehicle is. And I let them decide what it is. But I am the person who helps them navigate. So we can talk about what those roads ahead look like, and what might be difficulty, what might be difficult, what might be an obstacle, what might be challenging, and also what might be super easy, and what might be a smoother road, or a not necessarily better, but just a different choice. I let them decide what is the better choice for them, because they are the ones who are going to have to live through that. And I recognize that there are a lot of limited ability to give a lot of options within the correctional system. I know from experiences that we've had at the center working with PREA clients is that, we've overstepped boundaries within that system. And it's a hard lesson learned, and trying to figure out what's the best way to advocate for clients, and what is within our boundaries within that systems, because you're playing within 2 systems, or basically not within 2 systems, within 2 clients, because I see the correctional system as a client as well. The way that they want and believe things to be done, and what we might think is best for a client, or what we might do in a situation with a client if they were in the community, are 2 very different things. And so respecting that boundary, and I think also using pieces of trauma-informed care within the correctional system, and working with employees of the correctional system with trauma-informed care is a good approach as well. From my experience working within the correctional system on the inside of it, and then also now on the outside of it, approaching them with trustworthiness and establishing trust with the PREA coordinator and case managers and whoever you have to go through to get there, giving choice and saying that, like, these are some options that I'm thinking of. You know, what is the best choice for this place? And I think empowerment comes from acknowledging that they are the experts in that system, and they know how their system needs to function. Sorry, I'm actually on call, so you just heard my phone ring. Then you treat them like the expert in that situation and in that within that system, and also giving them space and choice to figure out how to work within that system and within this client. I think PREA complaints can often be very traumatizing to them and very stressful. So helping collaborate with them on what to do, how to approach it, and supporting them in that. I think also holding them accountable in that, and holding the system accountable in that, and holding the client accountable for actions in that, and giving them feedback in that is super important, and I think very trauma informed. Let me see if we have any questions going on. Okay, go back. So there we go. So like I said, a lot of the challenges are the rules and regulations of prison systems. I think learning those, because every system is different, every prison might do things differently, and figuring out what those are, talking to the PREA coordinator and the case managers about what that needs to look like, and what your role as an from an outside agency, and what your role as an advocate, and being client-centered, and how those systems can work together. The limited ability to advocate for those needs. I know we've had with an advocate a client who wanted their bunk changed, and advocating for that, and we faced a lot of obstacles and a lot of like misinterpretation in what the advocate was trying to do. I think having open conversations, establishing trust and safety with the PREA coordinators and the caseworkers that you might work with there, so they understand what you're trying to do as an advocate, and that they are aware of what your boundaries are, and that you're asking questions from a curious standpoint rather than a demanding sort of standpoint. There's not a lot of access to things within the prison systems that there is within our community systems. And so the way that we would advocate for somebody outside versus inside the system is different. And so it is kind of frustrating, because sometimes it feels like you're not doing a lot by just being there and holding these sessions with these clients who've come forward. And I was hoping that there would be some questions to talk about any sort of challenges that you would like to discuss. So if you want to ask questions in that little chat bar on the side, please do so. Any questions that you may have that come up, or anything specifically that you want to discuss. I'm trying to think of other examples of challenges that we've faced. I think as a supervisor for advocates who work within the PREA system, or with PREA clients, that's been very hard is just our relationship as social justice minded people, and our relationship as that with the prison system can sometimes be really difficult to balance. And so doing a lot of self check-ins and doing check-ins with your supervisor to talk about that and to be very open about what you're feeling in those moments. And to talk about how you can do best for the client, but also acknowledging that there are these thoughts and challenges and obstacles in your own way as an advocate. I know I faced that a lot working with my kiddos in the juvenile justice system. And I have worked in adult prisons before too, and they are pretty much the same, and just in my experience. And it was really hard for me sometimes to look to distinguish what was an obstacle within the system and what was an obstacle within me in the system. And so utilizing your supervision time to discuss that and to talk about that and see what that is, because you still have to work within that system. One for me, just to make it personal, was a lot of my guys were going to get out and be in the community again, and there were a lot of unrealistic expectations on the guys within the institution that are not going to be there when they are out. And there were things I tried to do therapeutically. There were, discussions and stuff like that I would try to have, that I would butt heads a lot with case managers, officers, administration within the prison system. I think also a mistake that I made, and that I think that that I think you should do as an advocate, and also that I try to do with the people I supervise that do PREA calls, is to make a better relationship between yourself and with people of the system. And so like PREA coordinators, case managers, officers that you might come in contact with, because usually the same officers work the same shifts while you're there. So knowing who they are and kind of having conversations with them about what you're there to do, because a lot of times, and I experienced this myself, there was a big misinterpretation of what my role as a therapist was and what I was doing versus what they were doing, because their role and relationship with the client is different. A lot of times my relationship with one of my clients was misinterpreted as a friendship. And because sometimes a therapeutic relationship or and even an advocate relationship that looks, it's a therapeutic relationship, can look a lot more casual and a lot more friendly than a relationship that they may have with a guard or an officer, or with their own case manager, or with a PREA coordinator or somebody of authority within the system. And so having real honest conversations about what your role is there, and what you're doing and what your intentions are, I think will help a lot with your relationship within the system. And also it's going to establish trust with the system and with your client, to know that you can operate within both, and that you have the interests of the client at hand, but also understand how the system works. Because it's really hard to advocate for someone within the correctional system or the prison system if people who are within that system don't trust you. That kind of system, that working in a prison, is very hard and is very traumatic for an officer and for people who work directly with clients or with people within that system. And then also you're coming in with this other kind of perspective, and you are zoned in on this one particular client instead of all the clients as a whole, because and what your interpretation of something that's happened versus what their interpretation of something that happened could be very different, because they're working within all kinds of systems and juggling all different kinds of systems. So all of that to say, I think building that relationship, and it'll take time. I have told my advocate to go out even when they don't have a PREA client, and to build a relationship with PREA coordinators and case managers and officers, be a regular face or be a regular voice. So if it's sending an email, calling them on the phone, kind of checking in on things, talking about how you guys can collaborate together, and build a better system together. Because a PREA coordinator wants less PREA investigations. And obviously we want there to be less PREA investigations because we want less rape in prisons, and we want less violence in prisons. And so if you can come at it in a way of you all are joining a partnership instead of we are a system that's, working against theirs. Obviously, when you're talking to a client, don't ask what's wrong with them. Ask like what happened to them. With what's wrong with them implies that something that they did something wrong, instead of what happened to them, not because of them. Especially within the prison system, clients often feel a lot of judgment and a lot of prejudice because of how we view people in prison. And I don't know anybody in my experience in prison who, minus the fact that they committed a crime that got them into that situation in the first place, but I don't know anybody who's there that didn't have something happen to them. I don't know anybody who goes and commits crime for fun. Obviously something happened. There's something a lot deeper to what happened. And to tell you, like, how I discovered this was when I was working with a kid, and he was in a lower level, so a minimum security place. And it was a locked facility, but they were able to go outside. Like, it was in a community. It wasn't behind brick walls. And his mother had called me because she needed him to sign something. And so I took him to go sign this paper. And I get a lot of information when I am in a car with a kid. And so we were driving back, and we drove past this school bus that was parked. And he said, "Oh, that's the bus I hid under while the police were chasing me." And, I will fully admit that I didn't really understand why people went to prison and why people committed crime. I will admit that I had the kind of judgment that at the time or prior to that they did it because they wanted to, or because they, did have lack of regard for other people. And then, so I felt I had a really good rapport with this kid, and we got along pretty well. And like, he was really open with me. And so I asked, was like, why did you steal from those people? And what had happened was, he was the oldest male in his family. He had 3 younger sisters, so 4 siblings total. Dad was deceased. He had died several years earlier. Mom worked several jobs. And when we had gone to the house for this kid to sign a paper for his mom, all of them were sleeping in the living room because their heat was out. And the piece of paper was to release a check. And she had planned to go get their electricity and their heat turned back on. And this had happened a lot with this kid. And he said, we didn't have any food in the house, and we didn't have, our electricity was about to be turned off, and we needed money. And so it kind of clicked something in my brain to really think about why people do the things that they do, and they're within these systems now. And not only are they dealing with trauma from the past, they're dealing with trauma currently, and then they're trying to process all of this at one time. And also within that system, working with officers and case managers and stuff like that, having to deal with a lot of trauma behavior, so a lot of fear and aggression and anxiety and depression and all of that from several, we had dorms. So they're dealing with however many people per pod and dealing with all of these different behaviors and all of these different trauma symptoms and all of this other stuff can become a lot to handle. And also we're dealing with a system that has years of thoughts and beliefs and processes that have come about without really thinking about trauma symptoms. So I think also holding accountable as you build your relationship with PREA coordinators and officers and stuff like that, holding them accountable to these beliefs that they've inherited by working in these systems, because you'll discover that people who work in prisons have been there a really long time. And holding them accountable to changing those thought processes as they learn about what trauma is and what trauma does, and then giving them feedback on their reactions to things, how they may have talked about stuff, and maybe helping them form consequences around that. Because just because somebody is having a trauma symptom does not mean they can't be held accountable, and does not mean that they can't have a consequence for that kind of behavior. Because I think, there's consequences, both positive and negative, for everything. And I don't think that trauma is a get out of jail free card for that. No pun intended. But I think that talking about consequences and not making them as punitive, maybe, and talking about what those consequences are coming from, and also what if you are talking to a client who is going to get out of the correctional system, maybe going on parole or something like that, talking about what those consequences are. I think that's a very trauma-informed conversation. As if you're talking about symptoms that they're having and reactions that they're having to situations, to people, talking about what those consequences are within community systems. And it's because they're going to go from the prison to a community, and probably a parole officer, probably to a lot of expectations from family. So talking about what those consequences and stuff can look like. So I'm going to exit out of here and see if you all have any questions yet. All right. And well, I think that is all that I have, since we don't have any questions. I did give in this last slide. So if there's any questions, and this is my contact info. If there was a piece that I missed, or a piece that you have questions about, if you're coming and watching this later, then right now, please feel free to email me. If you want to talk through a situation, if you want to chat about something, get some insight, or process a situation, please feel free to email me and we can arrange to chat. I would be happy to do that. I would be happy to hear what you have to say and your experiences, especially out in some of the other counties outside of Jefferson. And our prisons are in Oldham and Jefferson County. So if there's something that you is outside of those 2 counties that you want to talk about, or a problem that you're having and you want to process through that, please feel free to contact me and we can arrange to chat. I think PREA is a really good thing. And I know that when PREA became more prevalent in the correctional system that I worked with, and we were actually being trained in it, it was very, very hard to work that through, to train people on it, to have conversations. And I think a lot of it came from, it was just another thing, another added list that officers and case managers of things that they had to do, because there is a lot of demand on them. It may not seem like it, but it is. And it was really hard to prove. There's a lot of disbelief, and we experience that in the community when somebody comes forward about a sexual assault or any sort of sexual violence. There is a lot of disbelief. There's a lot of victim blaming. There's a lot of questions, and it's the same within the correctional system. It's just more concentrated because they are their own like micro community within a larger community. So being able to discuss that and to talk about that in a very healthy way, and kind of processing their feelings with them, and also educating them on what's going on with the brain and with trauma and with that person who's experienced that trauma on top of everything else. And just in kind of enlightening and expanding what their knowledge is of the client that you're talking to and the clients that you will work with potentially, and just educating them on what they're actually going through. So feel free to email me and to contact me with any questions or any processing that you need to do. And thank you very much.